Hey everybody, Dirili here. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Hakuouki Demon of the Fleeting Blossom. We are still on Hijikata's route, so let's get started. You can just sit back, relax, and let me read you a story. I also heard he'd improved, so I thought I'd stop by and pay him a visit. Good evening, Otori, Shimada. Hijikata is over... Before I could even finish, Shimada dashed past me to Hijikata's side.
I'm so glad you're alright, sir. For a while there, I really didn't know what was going to happen.
Shimada's eyes began to tear up, and he blinked rapidly to clear them. Aw, that's so sweet.
Come on, don't give me that. You really think I'd die so easily? You're right. You'll never die, no matter what happens.
Oh, if only that were true. But unfortunately, at least age eventually gets you. He rubbed his hand across his face awkwardly, trying to brush away the tears that refused to stop forming.
Hijikata, I'm going to be honest with you. You fought like a demon back at Utsunomiya. Morale is through the roof. The whole army won't stop talking about you, but... Your actions were dangerous and idiotic. You are a commanding officer, not a soldier. You don't belong on the front line. Otori, he's only just recovered. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Oh no, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. I won't let this slide. Listen to me, Hijikata. Westernizing our troops isn't just about giving them guns and new clothes. We have to change how we think about war. We have to learn new tactics. The commander charging in front of the army does not show that we are improving our strategy. If the soldiers are the hands and feet, then the commanding officer is the head. If the head is removed, it doesn't matter how much of the body remains. The war will be lost.
Oh my god. Hijikata is just beyond surprised, clearly. And so am I, really. Hijikata's eyes went wide. Otori continued oblivious, but I knew what Hijikata was thinking. Oh, back to that moment. I mean, yeah, that was true, but it was just so funny seeing Hijikata's face after seeing Otori go off like that.
What are you doing, Commander? You're the mind of the Shinsengumi. We're your arms and legs. Why are you running off to face the enemy alone? If you lose an arm or leg, you can always replace it. But if you lose the head, you lose everything.
The day Hijikata had become a fury, Yamazaki had said very nearly the same words to him.
Huh. Almost feels like Yamazaki's come back to yell at me. Huh.
His words were to himself, and there was a faraway look in his eyes. Otori frowned, confused.
Hey, Hijikata, what's so funny? This is serious. Don't you understand how worried I was about you? Hell, how worried the whole army was about you.
For a few moments, he simply stared at Otori. Normally, he would have fired back with sarcasm, or perhaps outright insults, if he was in a bad enough mood. But this...
Say whatever you want. It won't change my mind.
It wasn't easy to seem threatening around someone like Hijikata, but he tried. And it's so cute, too.
You're right, Otori. Sorry for worrying you.
He followed his surprisingly genuine apology with a similarly surprising bow.
What?
Otori had clearly prepared himself for a variety of reactions from Hijikata, but this had apparently not been one of them. For several moments, he simply stood there too flabbergasted to speak.
My apologies to you too, Shimada. I hear you had to carry me all the way here. Oh, no! No, it's nothing. Anything for you, sir.
Shimada seemed just as confused as Otori by Hijikata's sudden change. I didn't understand it either, but there was no denying he was different. Like some weight has just been lifted off his shoulders? Chapter 8. Spring ended and summer began. The battle between the old government forces and the Imperial Army moved to Aizu. The rumors said that the fighting was intense. Although he hadn't healed completely, Hijikata decided to leave Nikko as soon as he was well enough to march. The trip was long on foot, but without any problems. Eventually we arrived at Shirokawa Castle, one of the main rally points for our troops. At last, we had caught up with the main body of the Shinsengumi. Saito was there to greet us the moment we arrived at the castle. Saito, I missed you.
Chief Hijikata, I'm grateful to see you alive.
As good as it was to see Saito, he seemed somewhat the worse for wear. Battle after pitched battle had taken its toll on his body.
Glad to see you're all right too. I hear you did well.
Then he frowned and rubbed his hand at his forehead.
But, could you stop calling me Chief?
He looked Saito straight in the eye.
I'm not the chief, and God's willing I never will be. I'd be terrible. Kondo is the only chief of the Shinsengumi.
Saito met his gaze without blinking.
I do not intend to correct myself. It is your job to unify the Shinsengumi.
There was something odd about Saito's tone. Hijikata seemed to sense it too, and I could see him preparing to ask when Saito continued, his voice calm and measured.
Chief Kondo has passed away.
What? Hijikata only stared at Saito, his eyes suddenly wide. I didn't want to believe what I just heard was true. Perhaps Saito had been confused. Does he look like the type of man to get confused ever?
The only person who can rise to the position of chief is you, Hijikata.
He was qualified, certainly, both by position and action, but... Is Kondo really... My voice shook as I spoke. How could he say such a thing and just move on? If Kondo was really dead, didn't that deserve a moment or two?
Kondo is...
He glanced over at Hijikata, his eyes asking whether or not he should continue.
Tell me what happened, Saito.
His voice was clipped and tight. Saito held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded.
We have been told that, at the end of April, Chief Kondo was beheaded at the Itabashi execution site.
I swallowed. He hadn't even been given the chance to retain his honor and take his own life. He'd simply been beheaded like a common criminal. Perhaps Hijikata had expected that.
Didn't even let him kill himself.
His voice was controlled and unsurprised, but deep within his eyes, I could see a bottomless, yawning despair. Whatever facade he might erect, Kondo's death had been a blow straight to his heart. He would not recover from it easily. Later that night, Heisuke and Sanan came to visit Hijikata. And how did I know about this? Was I there too? As members of the Fury Corps, they had been resting when we arrived in the afternoon.
Your arrival has the castle in something of an uproar. It woke me somewhat earlier than usual.
Sanan's smile was unreadable, but Heisuke's emotions were not so difficult to determine.
I heard you got hurt pretty bad, Hijikata. Didn't think we'd see you again so soon.
Well, I couldn't just sit on my ass once I heard there were battles happening all over the place.
He sounded calm and relaxed enough, but I knew he wasn't that way on the inside. I'd felt depressed ever since we learned that Kondo had passed away, but that was nothing compared to what Hijikata had to be feeling.
We should be on our way then. Our work begins at night, after all.
Heisuke nodded. They were halfway to the door when Hijikata spoke.
Oh yeah, Heisuke, you think you could tell Saito to come by?
Huh? Sure. I'll go do that right now.
He cocked an eyebrow in question, but when no further explanation seemed forthcoming, he simply nodded.
Hijikata, you only just got here. You really should rest tonight.
He gave Hijikata a quick grin, then turned and left. What was that about? Is he suggesting I should rest with him? With Heisuke and Sanan gone, the room fell into a somewhat awkward silence. Hijikata hadn't told me to leave, but it seemed unlikely that he would start talking to me either. I opened my mouth to speak in a desperate attempt to break the silence when the door slid open and Saito stepped in. Saito to the rescue! Without even waiting for him to sit, Hijikata began to speak.
From now on, I'll be commanding from the front line.
What? If he were to be fighting on the front line, the violence would be intense. Hijikata still hadn't fully healed. Was he healthy enough to put himself in that kind of danger?
Do you intend to die in battle?
Saito's face betrayed no emotion.
No, I won't go out that easy. You've been out there. Only right for the chief to take that burden off you, right?
The chief heading to the front line would raise morale, that was certain, but... Hijikata was the core of the Shinsengumi. If he died, they would collapse.
You raise an excellent point, sir. If you mean to take my place, however...
The air suddenly felt thick, as Saito's hand fell to his sword.
I must first ask that you defeat me. If you can outbest me, then only death awaits you on the front lines.
Saito!
Getting a little full of yourself without me around to put you in your place.
His mouth twisted into a grin as his sword slid from its scabbard. I hope he doesn't have to use fury power to defeat Saito. Damn, these two are sexy in their fighting poses together. Hijikata, not you too! They didn't mean to kill one another, of course, but... Please, stop this! You're friends! You shouldn't be fighting each other! Hijikata turned his eyes to me, and they were as cold as ice.
You, shut up, and stay out of this.
Hijikata! He wasn't going to listen to me, that much was clear. All I could do was be silent and watch. They stood for several long seconds, unmoving. Then, in the same moment, they both exploded into motion. Swords collided. They struggled for a moment, swords grinding, until...
What?
Hijikata was thrown back to sprawl across the floor. Even only partially healed, he still had far greater strength than a human, and he wasn't the sort of person to have gone easy on Saito. Saito has drank the water of life in this line.
This war is not so easy that you might rush to the front line without your full strength.
Saito! The red eyes, the white hair. There was no doubt that Saito was a fury. Did you drink the water of life?
Don't worry yourself with me. I made my own decision.
I didn't know what to say. The simple fact that Saito had become a fury said more about the battles he'd been fighting than words ever could.
I understand why it is that you wish to fight. That is why I cannot allow you to.
There was a calm finality to Saito's voice as he slid his sword back into its scabbard.
Perhaps you would be able to forget your pain in the midst of battle. But I can't afford to let you do that. You cannot be permitted to turn a blind eye to our problems.
Hijikata slowly put his own sword away, then stood silently, looking into Saito's eyes.
Because I'm chief now. Because you're the only one who can unify the Shinsengumi.
Saito sighed.
Leave the front lines to us. You, Hijikata, should remain here and plan out our strategies.
Hijikata's eyes narrowed.
Fine. The front line's yours till my wounds heal. Thank you.
Then he turned to face me. Yes?
I leave Hijikata in your care. Don't let him out of your sight until he's healthy again.
Right! I nodded and gave Saito what I hoped was a reassuring smile. He inclined his head to me, turned to Hijikata to bow, and then left. As soon as he was gone, Hijikata's face darkened, and his brows drew together.
So, Saito thinks I need a babysitter, huh?
He's just worried about you, that's all. I didn't know how effective of a, babysitter I could be, but Saito had put his trust in me. I had to at least give it my best shot. I know you're anxious to get back into battle, but you need to rest, all right? In fact, let me help you with that. He gave a bitter laugh, then suddenly stopped. Oh, not again. He clapped a hand to his stomach in pain. Hijikata? He started to shake, and his hair and eyes changed color. The bloodlust had taken hold of him, and he began to moan in pain. I must make him endure it, I believe. I hope I'm at the right part that I think I am. I lost my place in the guide a little. Please let this be right. Pain twisted his face, but still he managed to croak out a few words.
You don't have to do anything.
It was like he'd seen right through me. But... He shook his head once.
If I can't get through this, then it doesn't matter if I heal. I can't go to the front line.
No sooner had he said those words than his knees gave way. Hijikata! He curled in on himself, moaning in pain. I wrapped my arms around his body and held him as tight as I could. Even breathing caused him to moan in pain. His fury nature drove him to thirst for blood. Exhausted and injured, his body craved it even more, and his pain was therefore greater. Hijikata! He looked like he could barely breathe. The bloodlust was devouring his body and his soul. How much longer could he survive like this? I could scarcely bear to think about it, but I felt as if his time was nearly up. By the time Hijikata's injuries had fully healed, it was nearly mid-August. Battle still raged across the Aizu domain, but little by little the advantage seemed to be moving to the Imperial Army. Our troops were being driven into a corner. Then, one day, Shimada burst into the room, gasping for breath.
I've got news from Otori.
Immediately, all eyes were on him. News from Otori meant something serious had happened.
He said we're going to mount a counterattack in Sendai.
Sendai was the leader of the Northern Alliance. In other words, they were allies to the Aizu, as well as the troops loyal to the former shogunate. Unfortunately, it was only a matter of time before the Aizu men on the front line fell to the Imperial Army, so the leaders of our army decided to gather all their forces in Sendai to stage a strong counterattack.
Our navy has already escaped Edo and is headed north via ship. Ballsy plan he's got there.
He smiled.
Might as well bet all our men on one big counterattack instead of waiting for them to get hacked to pieces, huh?
Excitement glittered in Hijikata's eyes. Apparently he approved of Otori's plan. Then, I will go to Sendai first. We should establish a stronghold for when the main body of men arrives. You? True, someone had to go first, at the very least to establish a base for the Shinsengumi. We'd also likely need to pay our respects to the leaders of the Northern Alliance. It just seems a little dangerous to have our representative be someone from the Fury Corps. Sanan gave me a smile. I'm from Sendai, you know. I have some connections there. I think I would be the best choice for our advance guard, so to speak. But don't all those people think you're dead? Wouldn't that be a little problematic? When he continued, it was in a voice barely above a whisper. There's something else that's been bothering me as well. Bothering you? He nodded and smiled, but it seemed that was all he'd tell me. What could be bothering him?
But, Sanan, you're supposed to be dead, aren't you? Seems like that could be an issue.
Yeah, exactly the same thing I said. Heisuke was right. When Sanan drank the water of life and became a fury, the Shinsengumi had announced to the world that he was dead. He can just claim that he's the evil twin brother. But Sanan only continued smiling. A minor detail, easily dealt with. True, Sanan had something of a silver tongue. I had no doubt he could talk his way out of awkward questions about his death.
Well, in that case, Sanan probably is the best choice.
He didn't seem entirely comfortable with it, but there was no denying the intelligence of Sanan's argument.
No, the Fury Corps isn't cut out for that. You still can't stand to be up during the day.
Hijikata himself was proof that wasn't entirely true, and his refusal therefore seemed somewhat half-hearted. It's difficult, certainly, but not impossible. Especially if you're drinking blood like he is. I don't see any reason to just follow behind the rest of the army, and I'd be glad to push myself for this. I didn't doubt his ability to do what he said, but I did question the validity of his motives. Hijikata and Sanan stared at one another, silent. I wonder if he's planning to betray us in this one, or if he knows something about the waters near my hometown that might actually help the Furies.
There's, more to this message.
He coughed awkwardly.
Otori will be leading Denshu Company to Bonari Pass in hopes of stopping the enemy advance. I believe he means to buy time so that our allies can head towards Sendai, but...
Isn't Bonari Pass at the front line now?
Heisuke's brows drew together.
I understand what Otori's trying to do, but I don't think it's going to be that easy to buy time.
I shared Heisuke's concerns. Could Otori's troops really hold back the far more powerful Imperial Army?
If we want Otori to come back alive, we need to send some reinforcements with him to Bonari Pass.
He frowned.
I disagree. If we are to win at Sendai, we must arrive at full strength, fresh and ready for battle.
But if we don't send someone to reinforce him at the pass, we're just abandoning Aizu and the Imperial Army.
Hijikata said nothing. The Shinsengumi owed much to the Aizu, but if he was to be victorious in Sendai, then the Shinsengumi had to depart, all of it. It was not an easy decision to make.
I will remain with the Aizu.
What? Until that moment, Saito had been silent. When he spoke, I almost jumped.
When my life ends, I want to be able to look back on it and say that I was my true self and fought for my beliefs.
That's in line with your story, the way it went in Saito's story.
Without the patronage of the Aizu domain, the Shinsengumi never would have become what it is. I could not abandon them now and keep my honor. I wish to stand with them until the end comes to claim us both.
For once, it seemed Saito's personal convictions were not entirely in line with the Shinsengumi's. He spoke with the same calm conviction as always. It was clear he would not be swayed.
I will go to Bonari Pass. Hijikata, please take the rest of our men to Sendai. Saito, you...
Hijikata had barely opened his mouth before Sanan cut him off.
Then, I'll go prepare to depart. The early bird gets the worm, yes?
Before giving Hijikata a chance to reply, he stood and left the room. Heisuke didn't seem particularly happy about how things had turned out, but after a moment of furious thought, he stood up as well.
Well, I guess I'll head out with Sanan. I don't really want to let him out of my sight, you know?
He gave a sort of lopsided grin.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
Hijikata's face was grim. Be careful, Heisuke.
Hey, it's me!
He gave a smile and wink, and dashed out the door after Sanan.
Shimada, I need you to go tell Otori and the Aizu what we've decided. Understood, sir. I'll be off as soon as I can.
He bowed and left. Saito turned once again to face Hijikata. Whether or not he'd been waiting until the room emptied to do so, I wasn't sure.
Hijikata, please survive.
His eyes were serious.
In the Shinsengumi, you and Kondo have laid out the path of the true samurai.
Even when they were slandered and despised by the people of Kyoto, or when the shogunate had begun to capitulate to the imperial army, they had never bent, never compromised what they stood for.
Our standard of truth is a banner for all true warriors. The Shinsengumi represents all samurai. We lead the way.
In every warrior's soul was honor, dedication, and loyalty. In the Shinsengumi, those values were made flesh. There could be no retreat. Saito and Hijikata looked at one another, silently for a moment.
As the man that made the Shinsengumi into what it has become, it must be your duty, Hijikata, to carry that standard.
Hijikata sighed and flashed a bitter smile at his friend.
You make it sound so easy.
His smile widened.
I'll promise you this, though. I'll stick around till either the Shinsengumi's dead or I am.
Saito bowed.
Thank you, Chief.
Then he turned to me.
I leave Hijikata in your care.
Don't worry, I'll make lots of tea for him. So few words, but with such great emotion behind them. Right, we'll be fine. I nodded, and I have to say... he wouldn't die even if you killed him. After all, I grinned. I don't think Hijikata could die even if someone killed him. Saito's eyes widened in surprise. I've seen him on the verge of death lots of times, but he always pulls through. Don't worry about him. He'll fight with the Shinsengumi forever. So... I set my jaw and looked Saito straight in the eye. Please don't die, Saito. The battle at Bonari Pass was sure to be an intense one. Many men would lose their lives. But there is a tremendous difference between going into battle prepared to die and going into battle expecting to die.
I won't die even if I get killed. That's quite a statement, kid.
He let out a quiet snort of laughter.
If you've got time to worry about me, maybe you ought to be worrying about yourself too, Saito.
He said it as a joke, but there was no mistaking the underlying sincerity. Saito looked at us both for a moment, then his face wrinkled in a soft smile.
I won't die easily either. After all, I will be fighting in the name of the Shinsengumi.
He turned his eyes to me.
Thank you for your kind gesture.
You're welcome. I accompanied Hijikata to Sendai. Concerned about Saito, Hijikata left Shimada with him and Aizu. Perhaps the two of them would be able to overcome dangers that Saito would have been unable to alone. Leaving Saito and Shimada turned out to be more difficult than I imagined. I spent so much time with them. All I could do was pray that they would survive and that we would meet again someday. Why do we have to split up so much? As September began, the cold autumn wind blew down on the main body of the Shinsengumi as they arrived in Sendai. The trip had been easy enough, but upon our arrival we encountered a new problem. Sanan and the Fury Corps were nowhere to be found. Great. Heisuke too was incommunicado. Ah, so this part's like Heisuke's route, I guess. From the villagers in Sendai, we heard disturbing rumors that murder had been on the rise in recent days. We scarcely wanted to think about it, but it hardly seemed like it would be a coincidence. That looks like a really fake mustache. Upon reaching Sendai Castle, we were greeted by a man in Western garb. As soon as he laid his eyes on Hijikata, his face split into a grin.
A long time no see, Hijikata. I'm glad to see you're doing well, Enomoto.
The man was Takeaki Enomoto. He had been the shogunate's navy's second in command. When Edo had surrendered to the imperial army without a fight, he had taken his flagship, Kaiomaru, captured 8 more battleships, and left. He's like, I'm taking these and going home. He'd taken his new fleet to Sendai and arrived before we had.
Have you already heard about Kondo?
Hijikata only nodded.
I apologize for having been unable to help. Our country has lost a truly great man.
Even I could tell that Enomoto's grief was real. It was a small moment, perhaps, but it was easy to see from it that Enomoto was a good man.
He would have been happy to hear you say that.
Hijikata gave a short melancholy laugh, but his eyes were peaceful.
But he wouldn't want us to stand around crying about him. He'd want us to get to work. Can you give me a rundown of the situation in Sendai?
Enomoto gave him a bitter smile.
You're right, Hijikata. Unfortunately, the news isn't very good.
I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach.
To begin with, there's something wrong in Sendai Castle. I'm not sure what they're thinking. I requested an audience but haven't received a response.
To ignore an official request was an odd response for someone like Enomoto to receive from a domain.
There's a suspicious group of men running around Sendai. Well, there are rumors at least.
Suspicious? How?
Well, there have been more murders here lately. And the rumors say some of the murderers ran back here to the castle.
Suspicious men running amok in Sendai, possibly murdering civilians. Sanan and the Fury Corps unreachable. It wasn't difficult to put 2 and 2 together. Hijikata and I looked at one another. There was no doubt that we were thinking the same thing.
Whatever the case, if this continues, we won't be able to take action. Perhaps if we could arrest these murderers and restore peace in this area. Enomoto, think maybe you could leave the murderers to me.
Enomoto opened his mouth to protest, but something in Hijikata's gaze made him change his mind, and he closed his mouth again thoughtfully.
All right, I'll leave this one to you. No more questions from me.
I spoke up just as Enomoto turned to go. There was something I had to ask. Have you heard anything about Okita? Enomoto had been to Edo long after we'd left. Perhaps. I don't know if I want to know. But he shook his head.
Okita, one of the incredible Shinsengumi captains, right? No, unfortunately, I haven't heard anything.
Oh. Well, thank you anyway. Well, no news is good news, in a way.
No, my apologies that I didn't have better news for you.
I bowed politely, and he smiled and walked away. Enomoto was a kind, candid man. I had a feeling he was well liked by his men, and he seemed to get along well with Hijikata. I confess I felt rather relieved. But not entirely, however. The dark cloud above our heads had merely lightened, not lifted. Do you think Sanan is the one killing people? Hijikata's face was drawn.
Can't say. You heard the same things I did. No way to know for sure, but if he is, I'll have to kill him.
Hijikata. His mouth tightened into a line.
He got pretty freaked out when he heard about where Fury's power comes from. Might be he's pretty depressed right now. Maybe crazy.
True. It certainly seemed likely that Sanan was responsible for the murders, but I hoped with all my heart that he wasn't. If the truth turned out to be different, then I didn't doubt Hijikata would kill him without hesitation, whether he wanted to or not.
Strange things are afoot in Sendai, Chizuru. We can't be careless. I'd like to know what Heisuke's up to, but our priority is finding out what's behind these murders. Got it?
I nodded. There were plenty of questions I wanted to ask him, but he had other things on his mind. It wasn't the time. It's never the time. The following day, Hijikata began his investigation. I tried to convince him that his body needed rest, not the stress of a murder investigation. I might as well have tried to lift a horse. That was how I found myself lounging around our rooms while Hijikata went off on rounds with the rest of the soldiers. I was so engaged when an unexpected visitor arrived. Heisuke! Perhaps it was only from being up and about during the day, but he looked especially pale.
Where's Hijikata?
He's off doing rounds at the castle. Heisuke was clearly upset about something, but he paused for a moment to rein himself back in.
Well, can you give him a message for me?
I nodded. Hijikata's been very worried about you guys. We couldn't get a hold of you.
I figured as much.
He shook his head in apology and frustration, but he was still clearly Heisuke. There was no way he was out murdering people. Can you tell me what's going on? He nodded vigorously.
Yeah, I can tell you everything that's happened since we got to Sendai. Just make sure you pass it on to Hijikata.
All right.
Sendai Castle isn't being cooperative. Chances are they're being pressured by someone by the Imperial Army. At least that's my guess. So we looked around a little more, and while we were doing that, we found out that Koto's actually in Sendai.
What? My father had been forced to do research on the Furies by the rebels before war broke out, or at least that's what we thought. But now he's here in Sendai?
Yeah, and, Koto seems to be leading a unit of Furies in the Imperial Army.
He'd grown suddenly awkward, possibly because he realized this news wasn't exactly pleasant for me.
Well, we figured we couldn't just let that slide, so we started watching their Furies, seeing where they were going and stuff.
And?
Well, I saw Sanan meet with Koto.
What? Heisuke explained that Sanan had told him they'd be more likely to get spotted if they moved together, and had gone off on his own. Some time after they'd split up, Heisuke had seen Sanan meeting with my father.
I don't know what Sanan's up to.
It was certainly possible that Sanan could learn what was really going on by speaking with my father, but if there was an entire unit of Furies under my father's command, then meeting with him under false pretenses seemed awfully dangerous. Like charging into an enemy line alone. You mean you'd like him to talk to you even if he's going to go do something dangerous?
No, see, it wasn't just once or twice. He's been meeting with Koto a lot, and if I bring it up, he just dodges the question. He doesn't act like he's got any plans to contact the rest of the Shinsengumi. I just don't know what to do. I heard Hijikata was in Sendai, so I snuck away and came here.
It was in the middle of the day, which meant Sanan was probably still sleeping. Heisuke was clearly suffering from being out in the sun, but the opportunity had been too good to miss. That must have been hard on you. I just let his eyes fall to the floor, not sure what else to say, when several strange men suddenly leapt into the room. What? Without even bothering to speak, they lunged at Heisuke, swords already out and shining. He dodged the attack easily, drawing his own sword as he moved. With a snarl, Heisuke struck out at one of the men before he had a chance to recover. The man staggered back, blood pouring from his arm. But even as I watched, the wound closed and the blood stopped. Furies?
Run, Chizuru!
But then, just as I turned...
Hold on, there's no need for that.
What? The voice was familiar. Very familiar. Father? The men who'd attacked Heisuke didn't seem to see this as a sign that they should stop, and they continued to advance on Heisuke, swords glittering. And that's where we're going to conclude this video for the moment, because clearly we're not coming upon an ending anytime soon. So, we have at least one more episode. Who knows, it could be 2 or 3. Hijikata's route is still going strong. So, hope to see you for that next episode, or one of my other videos. And I'd be so grateful for any likes, comments, subscriptions, or shares with your friends to show some support. Thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you all health, happiness, and safety. Dirili signing out. Bye-bye, everybody.